And we had another blockbuster. There can be no rest for the weary. The NBA offseason just keeps coming. Last night, ESPN NBA insider Adrian Wojnarowski dropped the bomb that Russell Westbrook had been traded from the Oklahoma City Thunder to the Houston Rockets for Chris Paul, 2 first-round picks, and 2 pick swaps. 2 contracts that were almost seen as immovable were moved for each other. Russell Westbrook is 1 year into a 5-year, $200 million deal, the last of which pays him $47 million. And Chris Paul is basically operating under the same contract, just 1 year further along. So the Thunder get a year's worth of salary cap relief and 2 more picks to their growing arsenal of first-round draft picks. If you want to know what the future looks like, at least in terms of the NBA draft, if you want to know who owns the NBA draft, it's the Oklahoma City Thunder and the New Orleans Pelicans. Might as well just have a 2-man draft with those teams and those general managers, David Griffin and Sam Presti, figuring out who goes where from now into eternity. But the real questions, the real analysis lies in Houston. How does this work? How can it work? Will it work? No. Russell Westbrook and James Harden together. I know everybody wants to get excited. I do. That's what we do, right? That's what we do after a trade. It's easy to see optimism. It's easy to play on paper. You know what it's easy to do? It's easy to play fantasy basketball or NBA Jam and pretend like this is an individual sport. I mean, folks act like this is Federer and Nadal on the same doubles team just because they're great at singles. By the way, they're playing right now at Wimbledon in the Wimbledon semifinals, and Federer's up 1-0 on Rafa Nadal. But basketball's not an individual sport. It's a team sport. It's not simply about talent accumulation. And in the case of Russell Westbrook and James Harden, you've accumulated talent that is almost identical to each other.
Matches you work for, you live for.
A marathon match.
4 hours and 55 minutes, the longest final in Wimbledon history.
You need to be constantly playing well throughout 5 hours if you want to win the match like this.
It was like they're both great chess players thinking ahead, but doing it in a split second each and every point.
I think this was, if not the most exciting and thrilling finals I was ever part of, then definitely top 2 or 3 in my career.
The Stephen A. Smith Show on
across the media landscape. The Dallas Cowboys should not pay Dak Prescott. That if you give Dak Prescott the kind of money he seems to be expecting, if you put him in the $30 million year class, you will compromise the rest of your team. Well, I have a response to those arguments, and we also have perhaps a new breaking report that suggests the Cowboys might be in a pickle as far as paying some of their biggest stars. That's coming up in just a moment here on the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio and the ESPN app. Will Kane filling in for Stephen A. You normally catch me 3 to 6 Eastern on ESPN Radio, the ESPN app, ESPN News, SiriusXM Channel 80. But let me revisit this. I talked to you at the top of the show about whether we've ever seen anything like this in the history of sports. Whether we've ever seen 3 heavyweights trading haymakers, going back and forth, trading claims to be the greatest of all time. Have we ever seen 3 individuals with a real argument that they are the GOAT, all playing together against each other, competing against each other at the same time? That's what you have in men's tennis right now with Roger Federer, Rafa Nadal, and Novak Djokovic. Djokovic beat Federer yesterday in the finals at Wimbledon, running his Grand Slam count to 16. He trails Nadal at 18 and Federer at 20, but he's younger, and he's coming for both of them. So have we ever seen anything like this in sports? Let me go to the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line, where I have Steven in Dallas. What's up, Steven? You're on the Stephen A. Smith Show with Will Kane.
What's up, Will? Love your show, man.
Thank you.
Hey, so I've got the answer. You mentioned the golf duos. When you mentioned Nelson and Snead, you left out Ben Hogan, and those 3 guys.
Well, I said Hogan. I left out Nelson this year. I said Ben Hogan, Sam Snead. You're right. I left off Byron Nelson.
I mean, those guys still have records that will never be broken, and Snead still holds the all-time record for PGA Tour wins.
Yeah, so here's the deal. We have to do this. I guess the only fair way to do that, Stephen, thanks for the call, is to say at that time, though, right? Because you can't have a greatest of all time argument in golf now that doesn't include Nicklaus or Wood. So at the time they're playing, are they trading claims to the greatest of all time? And you go back to that time in golf, and you might have that. I'm fascinated. Although it's not trading claims for the greatest of all time as in just pure boxer, for their weight class, Hearns, Hagler, Leonard, and Duran in the 1980s, that right there, I mean, you can't turn away from that. That's four guys, all of which have a claim, or in the top 50 at least, of ESPN's all-time boxing rankings. That right there, to me, is pretty close to what we get, but it's still not the same. These three, like, whatever comes after Djokovic, Nadal, and Federer, it's probably Pete Sampras. He's just clearly not in this conversation. And the other part about it is, while Federer has claim he's probably the GOAT of tennis, by the time this thing is done, I'm not sure he's going to be. So it's completely up for grabs at the same time. Let's go to Cole in Georgia. What's up, Cole? You're on the Stephen A. Smith Show with Will Kane.
Hey, Will. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, man. What's up?
I was just calling to say, first of all, I think you're right about Dak. It's not what he dictates; it's what the market dictates, and the market dictates you got to pay him.
Yeah, if you don't pay him, what else are you going to run out there?
Yeah.
Cooper Rush.
But as far as the top three of all time, I think Manning, Brady, and Favre dueling out in the 2000s was a pretty good combo.
Yeah, but Cole, okay, but here's the thing about that. Today, if you ask me who's the greatest quarterback of all time, my rankings would come down to two guys at the top of the list. It would be Brady, and he's number one, by the way. It's not now he has won the debate. But it was a debate between Brady and Joe Montana. So even in the 2000s, when you were having the Brady, Manning, Favre trio, you couldn't have left Montana out of that debate. That's like, you know, it's Djokovic, Federer, Nadal, but we always have to remember Pete Sampras won 20. But he didn't. He won 14. So he's not in the debate, but Montana, it belongs in the debate. Thanks for the call, Cole. That's the problem with going with those three quarterbacks. Let's do one more. Because I contend we don't have an example of this in sports history, in any sport. And boxing is the one I keep trying to mine, although golf might be the best. Because we've had, now Stephen from Dallas said, yeah, Ben Hogan, Sam Snead, Byron Nelson. There's three in golf. Also, a decade or so, 2 decades later, you've got Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Gary Player. There's 2 times you had 3 that could have claimed they were duking it out for greatest of all time. And I keep looking for boxing. Ali, Frazier, and Foreman, but Foreman was never really in the greatest of all time debate. He is in ESPN's top 50 boxers of all time, and Ali was just so clearly putting himself as the greatest of all time. But one more. Mike from Scranton. Mike, you're on the Stephen A. Smith Show with Will Kane.
How you doing? Well, how about this? You grew up in the 80s, right? You watched Bird, you watched Magic, and you watched Jordan. At the time, they were the 3 greatest players in that sport. There was no question. Now, injury, illness, cut 2 of their short, but Jordan definitely is the greatest of all time.
But you know what's I like it, Mike. I like it. But here's the thing. The only problem with that is we think of Bird and Magic's prime when they were duking it out in the mid to late 80s, right? And then Jordan arrives not just as a scoring champion, but as a champion in this debate in the early 90s. I don't really think of him as almost the next generation after Magic and Bird, even though I know they were on the court at the same time, Mike.
I understand that, but you got to look at it like this. Everybody knew that he was going to be the best. Like in the first 4 years, you could tell that he was going to be the greatest of all time. There was no question about it. And I got another sport for you.
All right.
It's racing. What about Gordon, Earnhardt, and Johnson?
Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, Mike, and I appreciate the call. You just about exhausted my level of NASCAR knowledge when you forced me to come up with the first name for Johnson, Jimmy Johnson. Although I think, by the way, Jimmy is probably considered, is Jimmy the greatest of all time now in NASCAR? I got into NASCAR in the late 90s for a good hot second when they opened Texas Motor Speedway. I went out there and I cheered on Bobby Labonte, and then that lasted about 2 or 3 years and I was out. So I'm going to be honest with you, Mike. I don't have a ton of NASCAR knowledge to fall back on here on, did you ever have a triumvirate duking it out for greatest of all time? I don't mind Bird, Magic, and Jordan as a nominee, but it doesn't reach what we're seeing in tennis right now. Nothing does, in my estimation. 888-729-3776. Will Kane filling in for Stephen A. on the Stephen A. Smith Show. So, as I said, there's a drumbeat going on as Dak Prescott has not yet reached a contract extension with the Dallas Cowboys. And there's an anticipation that he's not going to give the Dallas Cowboys a hometown discount, a Tom Brady discount to build around him, that more and more analysts are suggesting don't put Dak Prescott in the $30 million a year club. Right now you got 4 quarterbacks on an annualized basis who make $30 million a year. Those quarterbacks are Russell Wilson, Ben Roethlisberger, Aaron Rodgers, and Carson Wentz. And there is a sense that if the Cowboys do this, they will compromise the rest of their roster and ask the quarterback to carry the team in a way Dak Prescott has not proven capable of doing. Here's what Max Kellerman had to say on First Take.
Eventually, he may be a truly great quarterback, but that time is not yet. And if you're going to tell me I got to pay him $36 million a year, I ain't doing it. I like him better than Goff. Goff has more talent, but I'd rather have Dak as my quarterback. He has more stuff. Carson Wentz is another story. I'm going to put Carson Wentz aside. I think he's better than both those guys. But, injuries notwithstanding. But Dak I like a lot. I think eventually he'll be elite. But if you overpay him now, Key, you won't put a good enough team around him to win.
That was Max Kellerman earlier today on First Take, and earlier today on the Stephen A. Smith Show here with Will Kane. NFL front office insider Louis Riddick essentially agreed with that analysis from Max Kellerman. I disagree. I think Dak will be elite. I think Dak is on the rise. I think Dak is the exact kind of player that you pay. But we have a new news item here that might have poked up here in the past hour that suggests the Cowboys shouldn't just be worried about paying Dak Prescott. One of their other stars might need to be paid, not later, but right now. The Cowboys have some budgeting to figure out. Can they afford to pay both Dak and Zeke? I will tell you the answer to that coming up in just a moment. But first, Nature Valley sweet and salty bars are the indulgent break you deserve in your day. Have you tried the dark chocolate, peanut, and almond flavor? Now that's a sit on the dock and take a moment kind of bar. Nature Valley sweet and salty bars. All right, I'm going to tell you why Max Kellerman and, with all due respect to Louis Riddick, are both wrong. And why the Cowboys need to pay Dak Prescott. That's coming up on the Stephen A. Smith Show on ESPN Radio. Will Kane in for